Hey, listeners, I'm excited to have on the show with me this week my friend Titus Kipfer, who I have actually never met face to face. We've just met online, but we've been involved in a couple different podcasts together, and I finally got him on my podcast here, and we're going to discuss kind of church tradition and wrestlings with faith. Titus Kipfer was born and raised in a conservative Anabaptist church, and then kind of in his own faith journey went after the charismatic movement, at least for a time, and benefited from them a little bit, but then found himself kind of drawn back to some of his Anabaptist roots. And so that's going to be a lot of what we discuss and talk about what led to each part of his journey. Again, as always, if you enjoy the show and you would like to help support the show, you can go to patreon.com/Asher Whitmer, and for as little as $5 a month, for as much as however much you want, you can support the show. And I realize that in this time of COVID-19, there are many other things that we can all be supporting as well. And so obviously, if there are other things you're going to give your money to, go for it. Don't stress out about us. But it is a way of keeping this show going and keeping our food on our table. So if you're interested and you'd like to help out, just visit patreon.com/Asher Whitmer. I'll drop a link in the show as well. Also, another way, a great way that you can sincerely and honestly help the podcast is by giving it, if you're listening on iTunes, giving it a rating and writing a review. Not only do more ratings help it get spread farther on the algorithm in iTunes, but it also gives feedback, especially if you leave reviews. That helps me know whether I'm meeting your needs or not. Now, I know that there are about 7,000 of you who have listened to this podcast on iTunes. And so there's only one written review so far. So I know there's many of you who have not written a review, and I would love to hear your feedback. And I know in my last couple of shows I've been saying that I will read the reviews, and I don't know if that scares you or doesn't scare you or how you feel about that. But perhaps you're needing some inspiration or just help finding the words for what kind of review you could leave. Or maybe you're not sure exactly what kind of review I'm looking for. So I decided I would create some templates, some possible reviews you could leave on this show. Again, I'm not looking for just rah 5-star reviews. I'm looking for sincere, honest feedback so I know if I'm meeting your needs or not. So if you're needing help getting the words to write the review, here's a couple options you could try. The first option is you could say 2 enthusiastic thumbs up. Now, if you're familiar with Brian Regan, the comedian Brian Regan, that's one of his lines. And so if you're out of words and you really love the show and you just want to communicate that, you can say 2 enthusiastic thumbs up. And I will know you love the show. Or you could say, you need to shut the mic off and go put your head in some more books. And if you use that template, then I will realize that you do not like the show and you think I need more information about what I'm talking about. Or you could say, I love the topics you address and I love the interviews, but they're just way too long. Or you could say the opposite. This is a great show. I love the topics, love the interviews. You could have more time with it. Or you could say, you know what? Don't ever interview anybody. Just do one-on-one, you talking in a mic. Or you could say the opposite. You could say, you know what? I love the interviews. Do more interviews. And you could even give me suggestions of people who to interview, who you'd love to interview. Now, you can either do that publicly on the written review, or you can email podcast@asherwhitmer.com. And that'll be private. Only I will see that, me and my wife. You could say, I loved your last episode where you responded to questions that listeners had. Or you could say, you know what? We would actually rather hear less of you and more of your boys and your wife. I hope you get the gist. Obviously, some of these are humorous and so forth, but the point is that I sincerely value your feedback. It helps me know how I can serve you better. And it helps me also know, like, I don't want to spend hours recording stuff that is completely irrelevant to you. I want to know that I'm connecting with you. Obviously, as I plan and prepare, whether it's blog articles or podcast episodes, I do so according to what I feel burdened by, what I feel God is speaking to me about and teaching me as well. But I listen very closely to my listeners also, and where that overlaps is the majority of the content that we are going to produce, whether on this podcast or on the blog. And so I do value your written reviews, whether good, bad, in the middle. Don't be afraid. So there you have it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for rating and reviewing and helping us out in that way. Here is my conversation with my friend, Titus Kipfer. Titus Kipfer. Titus, it's good to have you on.
Hey, what's up, Asher?
It is good to finally make this connection. I think it was about a year ago that we first started connecting. You had me on your podcast, the Proselytize or Apostatize. Is that correct?
Yeah. That was the first podcast I had for a while with my friend David Russell, which was sort of an apologetics debate podcast. But I had friended you on Facebook and liked a lot of what you're doing, so we kind of took a break from some of those topics and had you on just for an interview, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was fun. That was kind of, I remember I had just bought this mic and stuff because I was looking at getting into podcasting as well, and so that was the first trial run of the mic. It's kind of a nice excuse to use it.
Glad I could be your guinea pig there.
Yeah, I think Teresa and I went to IGO with your sister, Ruth,
mm-hmm.
and then Teresa's cousin is married to your sister, Rachel.
Rachel, yeah, Craig
and Rachel. Uh-huh. And so I've kind of heard about this Titus Kipfer here and there, and then we're friends from northern. Well, we used to live in northern Minnesota, but some friends in Ontario, Steve and Sharon Kipfer. You're related to them somehow too, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. They are my aunt and uncle, yes. Yep.
Yeah, okay. So there's kind of this wide scope roundabout introduction to Titus Kipfer, and then finally we meet each other over the internet. And we had that interview. We had another interview on yours, I think, with Trudy Metzger in the summer.
Yeah, that was when the whole cam fiasco was going down. I had you and Trudy on to discuss that.
Yeah.
Also.
And then my brother started a podcast, a politics podcast, Third Way, which you can mm-hmm. check out on iTunes. And we're both on that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so we've had an increasing amount of conversations together, but we've actually never met face to face yet.
Yeah, it's kind of strange having. I mean, some of the best connections I've made have been over social media, and it's only been in the last couple years where that's been the case. But then, I've met some of these people in real life later, and they're generally just as cool in real life. So I'll assume that of you as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you count face to face if Skype, because we're seeing face to face, so I know what you look like and everything. So. It's not quite like the old-fashioned days when you could make yourself appear differently, I guess. So, anyways.
It could always be a Russian avatar that they're projecting to try to get information about conservative Mennonites. You never know.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so it's good to finally have you on Unfeigned Christianity.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
What you've done some podcasting was Proselytize or Apostatize. Was that your first podcast that you did?
Yep. Yeah, that was the first one I did. I first just started live streaming some of those discussions, and people seemed to enjoy the conversations I'd have with non-believers. So I started doing that a lot, which just kind of morphed it into an apologetics podcast. And then maybe a half year to a year ago, I turned that over to, well, my co-host and another guy who's much more equipped in apologetics. They kind of have taken that over, and I started a new podcast called That Jesus Podcast.
Okay. Yeah. So how long have you been podcasting now, total?
Oh, man, I probably started my first one maybe a year and a half ago, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good deal. Yeah.
So it's not been a real long.
Yeah. So what, well, I guess what led you to, what interested you about apologetics, and then what led you to switch to the new podcast?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always had an interest in evangelism, and so when I started that podcast, I thought, hey, it would be cool to have non-believers on and use it sort of as an excuse to talk to them about Jesus.
Yeah.
And I found that it was actually pretty effective in being able to have meaningful conversations with non-believers, but it wasn't very effective in changing their minds.
Oh, yeah.
And I've always sort of had an interest in apologetics, so that just gave me more of an excuse to study into it.
Yeah.
But, you know, a little while back, I realized, you know, this isn't my primary interest. I would say I'm more interested in missions, in theology, in seeing the church realize her full potential. And so that's sort of what my new podcast is focused on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you've had, I'm trying to think how many I've listened to. I know I listened to the first episode of That Jesus Podcast, but lately I haven't been listening to many podcasts, period.
Yeah.
But you've had quite the guests on there. You had, well, the first one was Rick Rhodes, I think, and then I've seen Finney Curavilla.
Yeah.
You've had Justin Brierley on. That was the other podcast, though, wasn't it?
That was the other one.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely worth checking out for listeners who enjoy podcasts, have a lot of time on the road, or if your work is feasible to listen. Some good conversations. How was that? How was the conversation with Finney?
Oh, I really enjoyed it. That was an interview I've been trying to land for probably actually over a year.
I know
I've been
you've talked
trying
about
to get
that.
him on. Yeah, and he promised me a podcast about a year and a half ago, and it just didn't happen until about a month or two ago. But I'm friends with Matthew Milioni, who also works closely with Finney up in Boston with the church there. So he helped me get Finney on.
Yeah, that sounds good. And yeah, speaking of Matthew Milioni, is that how you say his name?
Yeah,
Milioni. Yep. You've had him on as well, and you've also kind of started you and three other guys have kind of started a live stream every now and then. Is that something you're planning to do regularly, or?
Yeah, so this isn't really public yet, but we're actually going to turn that into an extension of the meme page. Have you been checking out Dank Kingdom Christian Memes any on Facebook?
I don't think I have. I've maybe seen some memes here and there from there, but
okay.
Yeah.
So there's a meme page we started, 4 or 5 months ago.
Okay.
And it's gotten a lot of interaction on Facebook. And so we're actually, all of us sort of met. A lot of how we got to know each other was through that page. And so we're going to actually start live streaming those discussions on that meme page, maybe discussing like the best recent meme that was created.
Oh, okay.
And, and we'll also probably turn it into its own podcast and YouTube show as well.
Oh, that sounds good. It's Yeah, I didn't listen to all of them. You've done 2 live streams now, is that correct?
2 or 3, yeah. Yep.
I think I hopped in for a few minutes of 2 of them at least. Yeah, good stuff. So with podcasting, going back to the first podcast, how did were unbelievers hesitant, or were they eager to come on and talk on a podcast, talk publicly? Did they know you were going to kind of challenge them, or did you present it as them challenging you in your face? Or?
Yeah, I mean, the ones that I asked for the most part would say yes. Now, most of the people I asked were fairly eager to talk about spirituality and religion, so sort
Mm.
of well, I shouldn't call them militant atheists, but the very engaged atheist types are always willing to talk to a Christian and
Yeah.
debate them. So I
Yeah.
would actually set it up as a debate. I would say, would you like to come on and have a courteous
Oh yeah.
dialogue and debate on
Yeah.
this topic? So yeah, it was good. I mean, we'd never really had a problem lining up guests for that.
Yeah. What did you know? Did you talk together ahead of time what you would talk about, or did you steer the conversation pretty directly, or what did you do with questions that you weren't ready for? How
Yeah,
did?
so usually we'd agree on a topic
Yeah.
beforehand. So we would do it on like the historicity of the resurrection,
Hmm.
for example,
Hmm.
and then I would go and really try to study up on that. And I would say the debates that I did, the primary interlocutor that I had was my friend Jordan, and I got to know him. He's an atheist pretty well through that podcast.
Oh, okay.
And just to be straight up, he's a better debater than me,
Yeah.
and uh, he's better at researching topics and studying them than I am. I had a hard time with that, so he probably kind of spanked me in most of those
Yeah.
debates.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the new guy, especially the new host on that show, is really really good
Yeah.
at debate and at
Yeah.
apologetics. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I enjoy debating too. I would rather debate theology at this point than
Hmm.
apologetics, just
Hmm.
because it's more my field of interest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. That's admirable. I mean, I'm not that versed in apologetics at all, so I wouldn't really know what to say. Although we do work with people who ask apologetic type questions, but I I think it's actually kind of admirable to. I mean, in a way, if the goal is to spank the other person with your faith or with your answers, then then it could almost create a combative feel to
mm-hmm.
Christianity, and to just have a public conversation about questions and be spanked by them or whatever. Like that, not only is that stretching for you, I'm sure, but it could also, for people listening, provide, uh, generate questions and provide curiosity, spark
Yeah.
curiosity for. Yeah, that's good. You also do some work in India, is that correct?
Yeah, so that started about, let me see, I'm getting really old. 8 years ago, I first got interested in foreign missions. So I actually grew up in Kenya. My dad was a church
Okay,
planter
that's right.
there.
Yeah.
But I was never really interested in missions. And it's interesting that you mentioned going to IGO with some of my older siblings, because I remember specifically having a conversation with my sister Ruth, and she was really into missions and was telling me, how important it is. And I was like, yeah, I think that's a calling for some people, but I'm going to go be like a Christian musician or something.
Oh, okay.
So I was not into it during my teen years. But when I was around 18, I read right when I got back from Bible school, I read a book by David Platt called Radical.
Mm.
I'm sure you
Hmm.
probably heard of it.
Yeah.
And that book really opened my eyes, and it was really really crazy, because up to that point I'd always thought that the idea of people who had never heard even the name Jesus before was something that existed only back like in the time of David Livingstone, William Carey, all of those guys. I assumed that by now the gospel would reach the whole world, even though I
Hmm.
grew up on the mission field, because Kenya is nominally like 80% Christian,
Hmm.
similar to America. So we were mostly just doing discipleship there.
Hmm.
But when I read that book, I discovered that millions of people are dying without even hearing the name Jesus, without hearing anything about the gospel. And also he talks about poverty statistics. That over 20,000 children will die every day from starvation, preventable diseases,
Hmm.
and that really blew my mind and really grabbed me. And so I just started researching unreached people groups on the internet. Came across a website called the Joshua Project, was
Hmm.
going over all the largest unreached people groups in the world, and I was reading over the profile of one people group called the Yadav people group,
Hmm.
and there's just one sentence that said most Yadavs will die without ever hearing the name Jesus once. And that sentence just grabbed me, and I felt like, God was really pulling me in the direction of this people group. And so I just kept doing more research over the next couple months, and felt like God was really speaking and saying, hey, look, this is what you need to give your life to, is reaching this group.
Mm-hmm.
So since then, I've been to India mostly for, 2, 3, 4 month trips, pretty much every year. There was a point when I thought I would move there permanently, and we may still do that if God leads. But right now, we're mostly working with an indigenous pastor over there who's trying to train
Okay.
young guys from the villages to take the gospel to unreached villages. So we're trying to be sort of that go-between between America and India, and
Yeah.
taking the funds there.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. What part of India is it?
So the Yadavs mostly live in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, which is north central India.
Okay.
That's where the largest concentration is, but they're
Yeah.
really all over India as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Teresa, my wife, spent a year, I guess about a year, in Hyderabad with
Mm-hmm.
Sam and Becca Gunty. I don't know if you're familiar with
Yeah, I know
Good
who
Life
they are. I've
Ministries. Yeah.
never met them, but
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. They you guys, you and your family just got back from there, didn't you?
yeah, we got back in February. We were there
Okay.
for a little over a month.
Yeah. And do you go every year?
That we've been going pretty much every year, not quite every year. We miss a few here and there in the last 5,
Yeah.
6 years. But yeah, that's sort of the plan. We're trying to figure out, what's the most effective way, if we should move there, or if it's good to just go
Mm-hmm.
over there in the winter to sort of see what the work is, how the work is going, and bring reports back
Yeah.
to America if people want to get
Yeah.
involved as well.
Is it maybe you mentioned this, but I'm forget. Is the local pastor that you're working with, is there a connection between him and your church or some churches back here, or are you kind of that connection developing?
No, let me see, how did that happen? So there was a video about the Yadav people group that I watched, and he was in that video, and there's another guy from Belgium who also helped make that video. And so when I was trying to go to India, I think the second time, I was just emailing basically everyone I could find who was working with the Yadav people group, and all the emails went to this Belgian guy. he's really the primary guy raising awareness for this people group, I would say.
Okay.
And he had worked very closely with this Indian believer who we're working with now. So he introduced me to the Indian believer when I was over there on a YWAM, basically the outreach phase of my YWAM DTS.
Oh, okay. So you went through YWAM.
Yeah, that would have been the second time I went to India. I did discipleship training school with YWAM,
Okay.
which is 3 months of training, then 2
Yeah.
months of outreach.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good deal. So what was it like? You guys just had a baby not that long ago. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
You're,
Yep.
is it
Zion Safiri.
Zion Safiri?
Mm-hmm.
How old is it, baby?
He is 8 months.
8 months. Okay. What was it like traveling with him?
It wasn't that bad, really. I mean, he slept most of the way, at least on the flights there.
Yeah.
We were pretty concerned, because babies, if they get sick with something in a foreign country like that, it could be more dangerous. So we took a lot of precautions, trying not to. Well, basically the sort of precautions we're all taking now
Yeah.
to try to not get coronavirus.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. We were doing that over there, then we came over here and keep on doing it.
Now we keep doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy how this has just totally changed our world, the coronavirus, and you've posted some things on there, and then I have some other friends who keep us updated as well about how things are going in India. What's it been like for them? We get to, if we get ordered to stay at home, we get to stay at home and still live. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
our government is dishing out money for us. But
Mm-hmm.
at least the Gunties, we were messaging with, my wife was messaging with Becca a little bit. And it sounds like they're actually physically beating people if they go out in the
Yeah.
streets and so forth.
Yeah, it's really bad right now. Basically, the Prime Minister Modi, who is has caused a lot of problems in India for Christians in the last ever since he was elected. He declared a lockdown basically without warning,
Wow.
and it's terrible. I mean, there's a lot of migrant workers who work in the cities but are from the villages, and because all public transportation was shut down like immediately, a lot of them were trying to walk to their villages. So you'd see these pictures of these caravans of migrants walking. Um,
Wow.
and a lot of Indians live hand to mouth, so
Hmm.
they have like a 2 hour window of time, at least in Bihar, where they can go out and buy food. But if they leave the house without like a permit of some sort, they get beat up by police. And a lot of these workers, they, like I said, they live hand to mouth, so they basically buy food with money they make, that day or the day before. And
Wow.
so people are going to go hungry. Like
Hmm.
and the government did promise to provide relief in the form of funds or food. I'm not sure which, but last I heard from Pastor Arvin, the pastor we're working with, they haven't given anything.
Okay.
So I just sent some money over, and he has like a 6-day pass with his car as an NGO to drive. So he took the money to one of his believers who owns a store, a food store, and they
Yeah.
were able to distribute food to quite a few families. And I've had quite a few other people offering to donate as well. So now that
Hmm.
I asked him for pictures and all the information, careful records of what all he did with the money we sent, and so that I have something to provide other people who want to donate. But we're gonna hopefully send another chunk of money there soon to just get food to these families.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I know the Gunties. One of the things they do is take food out to villages, dry beans, and so forth, and they were trying to get permission from the local police to be able to do it. I haven't heard
Yeah,
if they have or not, but it's definitely just a crazy world event that we've definitely not seen anything like it in our lifetime, and
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
what
I mean, I obviously we have. Go ahead.
no, go for it.
Oh, I was just saying, obviously, we have tons of cases here right now, and people are dying. But whatever we face here economically and even medically, the developing world is going to get hit so much worse. So
Yeah,
I think that's an opportunity for us to really pray and just try to find ways to help them right
yeah,
now.
yeah. Yeah, that's something I've been thinking a lot about. There's so my wife and I spent 3 years in Thailand, and Thailand's not. I don't know if it's considered a developing country or not. It's definitely poorer than the villages are poorer than small towns in America, but neither is it quite the same as China or um, even like Japan or Korea.
Mm-hmm.
But what was I gonna say? Um, Oh, just living there, spending the 3 years there, you get a firsthand experience of the importance or the challenge, I guess, importance to be careful in how we as Westerners, as Americans, interact with um, countries like that in terms of our money and our wealth. And
Mm-hmm.
there's been a lot of damage that is done through missions when we just give just dish out cash, dish out
Yeah.
money. And yet then in times like this, it's like that almost seems like the most, and here we are freaking out. My wife and I personally, we live in California. We feel like we're poor people here because we can barely make ends meet in expensive California, but the reality
Mm-hmm.
is we're still living way better than them, and how can we be a part of helping that side of the world? And
Mm-hmm.
do you have any thoughts on that, like the relationship between Western or just wealthier Christians in general with those in need, and how do you step in and help in a time of crisis without also, obviously, I think immediate crisis demands immediate action of some kind.
Yeah, I mean that's not something I'm really that qualified to speak to, but I would say, like you just said, there's a difference between relief work and just ongoing handouts. So
Yeah,
obviously, if people are hungry and starving, they need a handout. I mean, they
yeah,
need that relief, and sort of the same idea when there's a hurricane or something. You go to those places and you provide immediate relief. Whereas if you're trying to work with a country that doesn't have necessarily any disasters like this, but just has ongoing poverty, then you might want to implement some savings groups or other
mm-hmm,
long-term solutions in that
mm-hmm.
case.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's definitely something to be a part of. I think it's easy. Something my wife and I have been talking about is just the tendency. We're here in California, and they're in Virginia as well. We're ordered to stay at home, shelter at home, and so church is canceled. We're not interacting with people, and already here
Mm-hmm.
2.5 weeks it's been, 2 weeks I guess, and it can be so easy to get just focused on our little home and our little world, and it's really a time, like it's such a weird dynamic because the best way to help people is to stay at home, and yet we're in a crisis, and so you want to
Mm-hmm.
stay at least mentally and somehow engaged outside of yourself too, and
Mm-hmm.
we as a church in our local part of the world, to like, this is a worldwide event, and to be helping out any way that we can, at the very least through prayer. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
very most through prayer, but yeah,
Yeah.
crazy times.
Yep.
We so one of the things, we were both on the Third Way podcast with Christopher and Reagan Schrock.
Mm-hmm.
Also, he does the podcast with Anabaptist Perspectives. I think he's got another one too about books, but I forget
The books we
the
read.
books we read.
Yeah, he does
Um,
that with Jaron Miller. Yeah.
okay, yeah, yeah. We on the Third Way podcast, we talk a lot about politics and how that relates to how Christians should or should not interact with government, politics, things like using violence and force, and basically trying to present a third way than what we've typically seen, which is just the conservative, fundamental kind of Republican Christianity, pro-war, or opposed. The opposite would be the just kind of progressive. Uh, how would you describe? I'm trying to think about that. How would you describe the opposite of the Republican? What what's
The
the
Democrats.
the Democrats, Republican Democrats, and what are the third way?
There you
Uh,
go.
anyways, we talk a lot. We talk a lot on that podcast, and then after we shut off the mics, we keep talking. One time we just kind of got, some of us, I forget if we were all there or not, but we just kind of kept talking about our backgrounds and just our own journey in faith and church tradition and so forth. We're all four of us, me and you, Christopher, my brother Christopher, and Reagan, are from conservative Anabaptist background, whether it's Mennonite or Beachy Amish or a different. I think it's just those two, I guess, for us four specifically. But
Mm-hmm.
and it's not. I don't think it's uncommon for anybody to wrestle with their faith as they grow up, as they become adults, and as it becomes their own. But it does seem like the era we live in right now, people really, I don't know, people really wrestle with it, or maybe we're just more free to go explore other options too, and so it's a little more visible. Um, and you kind of talked about your journey a little bit, just getting into. I think if I remember correctly, the thing that attracted you first was the charismatic movement, and
Mm-hmm.
that's something that is. It seems to be kind of common from conservative Anabaptist circles, that we are drawn to more charismatic movements as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
some. Well, I in some ways more recently I've seen some people going to more liturgical kind of orthodox type traditions of the Christian faith. Well, I'm just curious. Would you mind sharing just some about your own journey? As you came from Beachy Amish background, is that correct?
Yeah.
And yeah, like what got stirring within you? What led you to the charismatic movement?
Yeah. You probably have some beachy listeners, right?
Probably. I don't know what
Yeah.
all specifically is my listening audience. I know on the blog it's probably maybe uh I see it's so funny when I take surveys or something like how, because I'll give Beachy as an option and then Mennonite as an option and then other as an option. And if I don't word it quite correctly, they use the other option and
Mm.
type in something that I would have considered to fall in one of the other categories. And so I can't get like a real clean specific, but definitely 80 to 85% of my audience is conservative Anabaptists, familiar
Yeah.
with Beachy Amish.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there's some obviously really good things about the Beachy Amish Church. I grew up in Faith Mission Fellowship. So they have Faith Mission Home there, which is the home for mentally handicapped children. So they're doing some really good work there. I think it's really cool what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in my teen years, I guess I started questioning what I consider to be extra biblical standards. So we were a pretty conservative on the Beachy scale because Beachies are diverse also. Um, Probably the one that bothered me the most is we were not allowed to, or there's a church standard against listening to any kind of music that had instrumentation with it. So we had to listen to only a cappella music, and we couldn't play instruments. And so I was always really into music. We had
Mm-hmm.
a 5 guy singing group that went on tour. I really enjoyed that sort of thing, and I really wanted to listen to music with instruments and to also try to learn an instrument. And so biblically, I couldn't really see any evidence for that standard. I couldn't see even any principle behind that application. To me, it sort of seemed like, God created this beautiful world for his image bearers to enjoy, and part of that is, artistic expression.
Mm-hmm.
And here the church is limiting part of that
Mm-hmm.
for Christians and saying this part of God's good world is out of bounds. Um, so that bothered me, and just other standards that I really could not see any biblical basis for.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that bothered me and still bothers me today is sort of the idea that other Christians are, there's there's all these code words that we would use like nominal or mainstream or
Yeah.
where we would kind of, maybe they're Christians, they might be Christians, but they've got some serious problems. And I actually agree, evangelical Christianity in America does have serious problems, but that always bothered me. Even when I was quite young, I wanted to be accepting of Christians who did things differently.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess when I married my wife, Brenda, she's not from Mennonite background, and I knew that it wouldn't really work for her to join the Beachy Church. At the
Mm-hmm.
time, she was part of the church that we're part of now, which is used to be Brethren. It's just non-denominational now.
Okay.
Has a lot of them would not like to call themselves Mennonite, but it's very similar to Mennonites in a lot of ways. And so when we got married, that just seemed like a good place for us to sort of meet in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you asked about my attraction to charismatic Christianity. That basically started with, there was the House of Prayer in Charlottesville that was sort of affiliated with the International House of Prayer in Kansas City.
Okay.
And so, the whole 24-hour prayer and worship thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I got to know the director of that pretty well, and really enjoyed, attending their prayer meetings every week, even when I was still in the Beachy Church.
Mm-hmm.
But also at the same time, I noticed that the Mennonites that I knew who were really passionate for God, passionate for missions, that sort of thing, all had a charismatic bent as well, in that they were more open to the gifts of the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
They were more charismatic in their worship and their prayer, and just how they express that. So that drew me to it as well. And I would say the third thing would have been just reading the scriptures and seeing that there's an awful lot in the scriptures about miraculous healings, casting out demons, tongues, prophecy, and just saying, if we're trying to be consistent here, why is this not something that we're seeing in our churches?
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of pulled me in the direction of the charismatic church, and I started, going to a lot of their conferences, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past couple years, I haven't been as involved in those circles. I think I've gotten a little bit tired of some of the shallow theology there.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry if there's any charismatics listening. I'm offending everyone right now.
Not going to win with anybody.
And there's definitely some excess there too in certain ways, and so I haven't been as involved with that as anymore. But I still think there's a lot of value in those circles and things that they can teach the rest of us, for sure.
Yeah. What so maybe I'll just ask the one about charismatics first, and then go back to you growing up. But what when you talk about shallow theology, like what do you mean by that?
It's interesting. So there's the right brain people and the left brain people. I always get mixed up which is which. But one of them, the side that tends toward emotion and feeling, I would say a lot of times maybe the split within Christianity is simply based on that. So a lot of people who are attracted to charismatic Christianity are the type of people who are emotional, and the Reformed types or other forms of Christianity are more intellectuals. They're just it's just how God made them. They're drawn to expressing their faith in different ways. So naturally, those sorts of the emotional sorts of people aren't going to be the ones who are producing the best and brightest of biblical scholarship.
Yeah.
There's a lot of just sort of cliches, a lot of the when you're talking about God or the kingdom, it seems like when I'm having conversations with a lot of them, man, I'm really bashing people. I love my charismatic brothers and sisters, but you asked the question, so I'll blame you.
I framed
it seems
you,
like
sorry.
a lot of the seems like a lot of the conversations are just sort of repeating spiritual sounding cliches that really don't affect me a lot, I guess would be the best way of putting it.
Yeah. Well, I definitely identify, and for me personally, I would tend to be more drawn probably towards Reformed, because I am a little bit more of a, like, if something seems off or doesn't make sense to me intellectually, I do not think of myself as an intellectual guy, though, because we were just talking about this as a family recently with some of my siblings, but all my siblings are way smarter than me, and so I feel like I'm dumb. That's putting it harshly, but but that's definitely what the style of church tradition that I would probably be drawn towards. My burden for Anabaptists is to have, because I kind of feel a similar tendency among Anabaptists in some ways. Is it doesn't feel like it's always that robust theologically. Probably for different reasons, not for playing more out of the emotional side of their brain as much as anything else. But
Yeah. And with that, I mean, I have, now that I'm thinking of it, I have at least one very charismatic friend who is very thoughtful and
mm-hmm.
very informed theologically. So I think a lot of the younger ones are trying to pursue, deeper thinking more. So I don't want to put them all in one category, just like, not all Anabaptists are
Yeah,
easily put in a box.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, just to say, we're kind of bashing everybody here
Let's
today,
bash
but
reform people now.
yeah, um, crazy Calvinists. So, the I think I just want to make it clear. I mean, the title of the podcast is Unfeigned Christianity, and the opposite of feigned, meaning there's no pretense, no show, but sincere and genuine. And the reality is, whether we come from Pentecostal background, whether we come from Baptist background, whether we come from Anabaptist background, what Orthodox background, a large majority of people do at some point wrestle with their faith, and so the acknowledging those wrestlings, those questions, and even some of the observations that maybe there's charismatic churches out there that you and I would walk into and seem really deep and meaningful. We just haven't found them yet. And there's definitely flaws within our own churches currently as well. Like we haven't found heaven yet. And so the point is not to lift us up as like the ideal Christian, but rather to process and kind of walk through the journey of like the things we were searching for and trying to find. So kind of going back to your upbringing, what you mentioned how it seemed like the passionate Christians were, and this is gonna sound like we're bashing Beachy Amish again, but the passionate Christians leaned more charismatic. And so why was that? Or what, like, is there not much space for, were the gifts taught in your church? Is there are people not passionate, or what? Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I would say my first experiences with passionate Christians, well, probably not my first experiences with them, but the ones where I started actually paying attention was actually at Calvary Bible School, the Beachy Amish Mennonite Bible School in Arkansas.
Oh, okay.
I had a term there of 6 weeks that completely changed my life. It sort of came out of a class taught by Ernest Eby called Doctrine of the Church. And I mean, this is such a cliche word, especially within charismatic churches, but I believe God did bring revival there during that term.
Yeah.
And so one of my mentors there, Brent Stolzfus from he's actually, I think he's still in New York. He's been working there. He would just get these prayer meetings together with, some of us guys, and there was just a real emphasis on prayer, and not just the kind of prayer where you're in a circle with a list of prayer requests and you just kind of go down through the prayer requests. Although, I mean, I don't have anything against that kind of prayer or against, more liturgical prayer, but this was a sort of prayer that I hadn't experienced before, where everyone was spontaneously pouring out their hearts to God.
Wow.
And that's something that charismatics are very strong in, is that prayer. They emphasize that a lot. And So within that, there was when I would talk to a lot of the guys who I would really look up to, the people who were seemed passionate, were interested in reaching the lost, and I would bring up the gifts of the Spirit. Almost without fail, they were not simply continuous in their theology, but they emphasized that this is something that we need to, in a sense, pursue.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that maybe was just with the guys who were influential in my life. Maybe it's just anecdotal, but it seemed like I saw that pattern, and that initially made an impression on me.
Yeah.
Because that's you only know the people who you come in contact with. That's just your
Yeah.
experience, and it plays
Yeah.
into your story.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. There's definitely, and this is something that in my interaction with charismatic, I've got several different friends who are fairly charismatic, either in just maybe they're still in a conservative Anabaptist church and they just have a more charismatic personality and even theologically leaning, or they are a part of charismatic churches today. And one of the things that I really appreciate about them is their belief in God's ability to work today and to speak today and to guide us, and that we can walk with
mm-hmm.
Him, walk in that relationship with Him today. What is, I also know some people who have, I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier, you know, an emphasis in charismatic movements is speaking in tongues or seeing and experiencing healing. And
Mm-hmm.
I know a fair amount of people who uh, tried and prayed and asked God for both, whether it was tongues or healing, and they've not experienced that, and that's causing some disillusionment. I know a couple people where that's caused them to leave their faith. And
Mm-hmm.
what, like I know, you mentioned kind of getting a little tired. Well, that's where you talk about being tired of the shallow theology. But even I remember when we talked last summer, kind of in a way returning back to some of the Anabaptist roots and so forth. Was that a part of that journey? Like just not always seeing it come to fruition or something, or how would you process that
Um.
part of?
Yeah, perhaps. So when I left the Beachy Church, there was a couple Anabaptist distinctives that I held on to, like non-resistance, the head covering, some of the things that I still saw in Scripture. But I
Mm,
wasn't very grounded in historic Anabaptism or some of the foundational Anabaptist theology. It wasn't very interesting to me, and that's kind of where I was at when I was kind of moving more in charismatic circles. And then it's just been in the last, I would say, maybe 2 or 3 years that I've been rediscovering historic Anabaptism and really finding a lot of value there. Just studying, the Anabaptist reformers and Christocentric hermeneutic, nonviolence, and,
mm,
and finding that
mm,
there's really something powerful about those foundational Anabaptist values, and sort of trying to build my worldview from there on up. And that was probably had to do with some disappointment within the charismatic movement. Um, but also, I think that our family of origin just has a big effect on us, even
mm,
if we're
mm,
trying to trying to rebel or do our own thing. It really makes an impact on us. So
yeah,
maybe it's just something residual in me that was like, hey, you should really look into this heritage, because it is a really amazing heritage. I mean, Anabaptists were sort of pioneered religious liberty in a lot of ways.
yeah,
They were, uh, they were stood against slavery. A lot of them. I mean,
Mm,
it's just a really rich heritage, especially in the 21st century when, um, evangelical Christianity in the West has become sort of a stench to people in a lot of
mm,
ways. I feel like Anabaptism doesn't have a lot of that baggage.
mm, mm. Yeah, and it seems almost ironic in some ways that like I have a lot of Protestant friends who are actually beginning to sound almost Anabaptist theologically. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's some lifestyle things that are still very not conservative Anabaptist, but as far as the way they view, yeah, a Christocentric hermeneutic, Jesus being the focus and point of Scripture, which I don't. Sometimes I'm not sure what to do with that because I've never met a Christian who said Jesus is not the point.
Yeah.
But yeah, that emphasis and even just that Jesus's Sermon on the Mount is specifically for us, the church today, and not some future event. It seems like there's a shift in Christianity in general, kind of an openness to
Mm-hmm.
Anabaptism.
Yeah, there definitely is. And I remember when we talked to Bruxy Cavey, he was paralleling
Yeah.
it with the Young, Restless, and Reform movement, where there was sort of a resurgence in Neo Calvinism. And now there seems to be sort of a resurgence of Neo Anabaptism, which
Mm-hmm.
is really exciting to see. And I hope that's not the only reason why I'm getting back into Anabaptism because it's trendy. But I really
Yeah.
do think that Anabaptism has something to offer the 21st century in the West, especially in the Trump era, where this is a heritage of Christians who were never tied to the state in unhealthy ways and really have something
Mm-hmm.
to offer our generation, where our generation is fed up with a lot of conventional Christianity and they're looking for something more
Mm-hmm.
authentic, where there's, close
Mm-hmm.
community. That's been a value of Anabaptism, community, discipleship. I think those are values that a lot of young people are actually looking for right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. The last couple of years I've been in Bible college and going through a church history class, and the when we got to the Anabaptists, we had a decent amount of time, not a ton, but more than I was expecting from a primarily Protestant school on the Anabaptist origin and kind of what led out of the Reformation and what the Anabaptists were pursuing. From the Reformation, they kind of forgot about the Anabaptists and we're still tracing most of the Protestant church. But what's interesting is it struck me as I was reading, even like was reading in church history in plain language from Bruce Shelley, who's very Protestant. Uh, Even he, like what he described the Anabaptists to be after and what their goal was what I hear a lot of people desiring today. And
Mm-hmm.
whether it's from conservative Anabaptist churches or even from other um, Protestant or other church traditions. And that was kind of eye opening for me to see how, a lot of this, the non political Christianity, like a faith that speaks into society that is not tied up in politics and money and power, as well
Mm-hmm.
as a Holy Spirit empowered body, like the church being a body of people who are empowered by the Holy Spirit. Like those were Anabaptist emphasis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the Anabaptists were also an extension of a rival church all throughout church history. The Donatists and the Waldensians and the Lollards, and
Mm-hmm.
um, I think that there's always been a countercultural group of Christians, a thread that goes throughout church history, that
Mm-hmm.
sure seems to me like the path of Jesus. My wife and I were just reading this morning the ending of the book of Luke, where Jesus goes to the cross, and it just struck me how the Jewish religious leaders handed Jesus over to Pilate, to the political authorities, to be executed. And that's been the pattern of faithful Christians throughout history, is that when they fall out of step with the 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 current oppressive religious system, often that religious system would execute them by means of the state. And it's just
Yeah.
perfectly following in the footsteps of Jesus. There's always been those
Yeah.
groups throughout church history, and that's what a lot of our Anabaptist forefathers experienced as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So where you kind of touched on it already. Where are you now, or what is your vision for yourself, your family, for your generation?
Yeah. So I'm comfortable identifying as an Anabaptist theologically. There's 6 values that I've really tried to pursue, and I really want to see the church pursue. Um, it's kind of my home base. So
Yeah.
the first 2 are pretty similar: prayer in the Scripture, and all these values are super foundational. I mean, nothing is gonna be surprising or outlandish, but
Yeah.
I think the most important things are just the simple things, that
Yeah.
if we did more of those things and actually practice these values rather than just talking about them,
Yeah.
I think we would see revival. And like I said, the first is prayer and Scripture. So especially when God first began moving in my life, like the primary thing that I felt impressed to do was just get alone with the Word of God and prayer. And
Mm.
just, no matter how difficult it is, I remember waking up super early one morning and like forcing myself to read the book of Jeremiah, and it was the most dry, lifeless experience I ever had, and I just went to bed feeling completely defeated.
Yeah.
But I was determined to find God, and like I just kept doing it over and over. Like, I'm gonna force myself. It sounds bad, but force myself to pray,
Yeah.
right? Because I was desperate to find God, and eventually I started enjoying that, and I started
Wow.
experiencing like this connection with God.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's united, missionaries,
Yeah.
revivalists, men and women of God throughout history, even if they had other differences, is that they would always get alone with God.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, I would say holiness. So pursuing personal holiness, victory over besetting sins, like making
Mm.
that your like tenacious fight to pursue holiness, and
Mm.
that victory obviously through the power of God's Spirit, and not allowing sins like pornography to run rampant in the church. And I know you've done a lot of work in that area, which is great.
Mm.
And then community, like I said, our
Mm-hmm.
generation is looking for close-knit community and discipleship where we have those close relationships. And I personally think that works best in house churches or small groups like that. And I think that the church should be the closest family unit that you can experience anywhere. That should be what attracts people to us. And then the last
Mm-hmm.
2 values are also sort of related to each other. It would be caring for the poor, caring for the physical needs of people, and then the Great Commission. So going and making disciples of especially unreached parts of the world that have never heard the gospel. So those are all super simple things. It's not like sitting around arguing sovereignty of God or something, which I enjoy doing
Yeah.
as well. But I think these are simple values that, like I said, if we Christians put our energy, our free time into practicing these things,
Yeah.
we would see the church come to a much healthier place and a lot of vitality.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember the thing when you first told some of us about these 6 commitments or foundational values, however you call them. The thing that stood out to me was how, yeah, they're simple, they're basic, but our generation doesn't talk about them. Have you thought
Mm-hmm.
about that? Like, we don't. To hear,
Yeah, I mean, they're
I've heard you talk about fasting and praying in a way that has challenged me. Like, I don't. Fasting and praying is a drudgery to me, and
I mean,
it's
it's not sexy. I mean,
no.
it's not like something that we can sit around and talk about and sound super smart and
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
but it's hard work, it's discipleship, it's
Mm-hmm.
gritty, and it takes self-control and discipline. But when I live that way, when I deny myself and like pursue those things in sort of an ascetic way even,
Mm-hmm.
I find that when I find the most pleasure and joy when I do that, when I
Yeah.
deny myself and pursue these things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can definitely identify with that as well. There's not just being said that what matters is the heart and Jesus loves you. Like those don't give you, it doesn't give you anything to pursue, and it doesn't give you an answer for like when you see in your personal life something contrary to scripture. And
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm challenged by your commitment and challenge to the rest of us to actually pursue those things. Like don't holiness and walking with God is not just something we let happen to us, but something we go out and pursue as well.
Yeah, and it's something. I mean, just because I've made these foundational values doesn't mean I do them very well.
Yeah.
I've been struggling a lot recently with self-control in a couple of areas, especially in regard to media. So
Mm.
I'm
Mm.
addicted to social media. I'm addicted to YouTube. Like it pulls me in, and I think it's designed to do that. And
Mm.
so I've been talking to my wife and saying, what are some ways that we
Mm.
can live free from this stuff, even if it might not be a sin. It takes up all your time, so you can't even pursue those
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
things. And so like we're coming up with ideas of maybe just 15 minutes of social media every day in one sitting, so you're
Mm.
not like looking at your phone every time you have a bored moment throughout the day.
Yeah.
So these are things like I'm fighting tooth and nail to overcome the distractions and to
Mm.
like implement these things in my life. And often I feel like, man, I'm just constantly failing. But like I never want to get to the point where I settle.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
sort of this ideal disciple of Jesus that I envision for myself that I want. And I know guys who are living that way. Like I have role models and mentors that I know in real life, and a lot of them I'm trying to interview on my podcast and have been, who I know are living this way. And so I
Mm.
know it's attainable with the power of God's Spirit.
Mm.
And I think that if young people really had something to pursue like this, like something to
Yeah.
give our lives to, like it would make life
Yeah.
exciting and like worth living.
Yeah. 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 That's good. That's something my wife and I have been talking about too. Just the other day, I had a kind of a quarterly review, Day of Solitude time, and just looking back and feeling like the last year, even, but especially the last few months, I've not really poured into relationships, and that was one of your commitments as well, community.
Mm-hmm.
And I was asking why,
Yeah.
like why don't I? And my initial response was just a crazy busy time of life. We've got 3 kids. I'm in Bible college. We live in California, so got to work my butt off to make ends meet. But then the reality is that's not really why. Like when I'm studying in the morning, it's so easy to go every 15 minutes or something, like go check email or go check the
Mm-hmm.
Facebook, like what are those people saying in that Facebook conversation by now or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
then they're saying something that gets you riled and you spend the rest of your day thinking about that. And just
Mm-hmm.
how like the media eats up little bits. For me, it's never like I blow an hour or two on social media, but these little
Mm-hmm.
bits here and there, and not being able to
Yeah.
focus on what I need to do so that at the end of the day I don't have to do more homework, but we could have people over, or we could, you know, and so I think there's those other things that matter, relationships or prayer, scripture, that even the Great Commission, that are getting nudged out because of things
Mm-hmm.
like media that just eat up little parts of our life. And
Yeah, and it overstimulates you too. I don't think our brains were designed for the amount of stimulus you can get from
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah.
And so if you're constantly getting a little dopamine hit from clicking on that notification button and seeing who commented on your
Yeah.
post throughout the day, like it honestly takes joy away from me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is a way to use social media responsibly where it can bring life. And like I said, I mean, we met over social media, so
Yeah.
like it can be a powerful way to build relationships with people and even put content out there. But I think it's something that you have to put some kind of guidelines on. That's a
Yeah.
church standard that I'd be all for.
Yeah.
Or maybe not a church standard, but a personal standard.
Yeah.
And I think honestly, like I think in the future people are going to look back and realize that culture has been using social media in a very unhealthy way. I honestly think that it'll be sort of like smoking, where we look back and wonder how in the world everyone was smoking back then and didn't know it was destroying their lungs. I think we're going to look back and say, like if you look at an old movie, everyone's smoking, right?
Yeah.
And if maybe back in the future, they're going to look at movies of today's time and see everyone on their phones and be like, man, don't you know that creates depression and anxiety and loneliness and
Yeah.
all sorts of mental instability? Like, don't
Yeah.
you know that's causing suicide in teenage girls? And
Yeah.
how did you not get some reins on that
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah.
But it's happened so fast. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
we're not prepared for this. It came so fast, and we're still figuring it out.
Yeah. 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 Well, it's been an hour. Thanks so much for talking. There's a whole lot more we could continue talking, but I think we're gonna have to leave it here for now, and then we can have a part 2 down the road.
There you go. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on.